This KFAN podcast is sponsored by Builders and Remodelers, exclusive Twin Cities provider of Elements Windows. Get the highest quality windows at unmatchable value. Visit buildersandremodelers.com for more details.
Your child has so much potential, but your local schools may not be right for them. Check out K-12. K-12-powered schools are accredited tuition-free online public schools for students in kindergarten through 12th grade. This is not your typical homeschooling. With state-certified teachers specially trained to teach online, your child will learn at their speed, at home, with innovative, engaging technology. Join the more than 3 million families who have chosen K-12. Go to k12.com/podcast today to learn more. That's k12.com/podcast.
This is your We're Not in California Anymore leader fan radio network.
That's frustrating.
And KFAN.com. 2 minutes and 12 seconds past the hour, 3 o'clock Central Daylight Saving Time. Welcome back. It is a midweek edition of the Bumper to Bumper program on another fairly dark, dank, extremely overcast and quite chilly weekday afternoons here in the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. My name is Dan Barreiro. I host the program. Guardsy produces the show, and we thank you for your participation in today's festivities. A power-packed broadcast, lots of good guests. We'll give you details on all of that. There will be significant post-morteming. Well, that's probably the wrong term because the Wolves aren't dead yet, but they approached game one. Let's just say we finished slightly short of being competitive in the second half of game one of the Western Conference Finals. There'll be a lot on that. There will be some hockey conversation today. Louis, the fan has learned, is scheduled not only to be with us at 4:15, but to be in this very studio. Luigi at 4:15. And that will be a big part of the sort of the meaty middle section of today's broadcast. If you want to get in on the fun, hit the Bradshaw and Bryan KFAN text line ahead of time at 64686. There will be some political discussion. Pat Kessler is scheduled in studio at about 5:30 this evening as well. So I think most fans get this. I'm assuming the Timberwolves players themselves are aware of it. But we're not in California anymore. And by that I mean we're not playing either of the California teams that we eliminated with relative ease in rounds 1 and 2. And you'll recall that the Wolves were down 1-0 against the Golden State Warriors. And at the time, we didn't know how long Steph Curry was going to be out, but nevertheless, there was kind of a feeling of, we'll be fine. Wolves conference finals, I'm not ruling out the possibility that they will be fine. But I think we've seen enough already to understand that we're playing slightly is understating it, a significantly better, more challenging opponent with less obvious weaknesses than we did in rounds 1 or 2. And in round 1, we learned pretty quickly. Was that series one? We won game 1, right? And then we lose the second game?
We lost game 2 in LA.
So it's 1-1. Yep. And even then there were people worried. But I think it became fairly clear that the Lakers defensively were just not up to putting any kind of meaningful pressure on those Wolves. In series 2, it was, Golden State's kind of small. Their defense is better, but their best player is injured. So you got a really good chance to rebound and to take control of the series, which ultimately the Wolves did. I think we were reminded last night that you're going to have to, if you're going to recover in this series, the hill's going to be a little bigger to climb. There's less margin for error. They, like you, are incredibly healthy. They, like you, are incredibly deep. And they, like you, are maybe even more so committed defensively to maintaining a measure of pressure that might well mean that you curl up in the fetal position. The Wolves defensively at their best on their run last year, that's what they did. That's what they've done during certain periods of the first two series this time around as well. This is a far more daunting challenge. We'll all agree on that. Oklahoma State. Oklahoma City, again, they won. We ended up with, 49 victories? They won 19 more games than we did.
Yeah.
They finished with 68 victories. That's pretty rare. Now, you can say, I think part of the reason it might have been easy to dismiss that as being not as meaningful as that number used to be is that, you had Cleveland with a ridiculous record, and where did that lead? And it's the regular season, and maybe the league's a little weird these days, and you can have that kind of, the kind of regular season record that once upon a time was record-breaking, right? Teams didn't routinely win 68 games in this league or even 64, 65 games in the league.
That's true.
And yet that's what was happening this time around. If we didn't know it already, we found out the hard way that there is recovery is possible, but they're not going to make it as easy as the last two opponents. A, because they're better, and B, because they're healthier. That's the combination that the Wolves are indeed dealing with. We talk a lot on this show about the ant colony. I think it's fair to say that last night, pretty much from start to finish, the ant colony got stepped on.
The rain washed it out, I think.
You know how that, when you were a kid,
yep,
and you stepped on the anthill, and then you watched the ants scurry haphazardly in a million different directions.
Yep.
That's what the Wolves bench players, secondary players, complementary players looked like last night, right? They're running around. There didn't seem any rhyme or reason. We're just kind of all going in different directions, and we don't know what to do and where to go and how to handle this bully that is taking the toe of his boot to our livelihood, to the place where we reside. What are we supposed to do with it? The numbers were staggering, right? I think it's pretty much fair to say. It wasn't difficult to figure out that if Naz Reid, not to mention Dante DiVincenzo, and Nikhil go a combined 6 for 25 from the floor, your chances are not very good, right? Your chances in any series, let alone against a team like this on the road in game one, not going to work. So when I say, let me correct myself.
I was going to say 7 for 36.
Yeah. 6 for 25 was just Nah and Dante. If you add in Naz's 1 for 11, 7 for 36. And what bothered me more about Naz, and this has happened from time to time, and it's concerning, it's got to change, the nonchalance with which he is just moving the ball from point A to point B like it's a I don't know, it's a preseason game or a preseason scrimmage. I don't understand doing that against any team in the postseason, but I certainly don't expect you to feel comfortable doing it against this team that thrives on that sort of nonchalance. There was a nonchalance to it that goes beyond just missing shots. And then there's Ant himself. I mean, to me, it was the perfect storm of you did not get nearly enough from the colony, and frankly, after the first half, you did not get nearly enough from Ant himself. How healthy was he? I don't know. He comes back it looked like he twisted it pretty bad, actually. He came back. How much of an impact did that have on the way he moved? I don't know. You tell me. But the combination didn't work. I don't think he scored in the fourth quarter.
Did not.
And, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander had a dreadful shooting exhibition in the first half, but he ended up with, I think, 20 points in the second half of the game, and he alone outscored the Wolves' big two in the second half when the game obviously was completely taken away from the Wolves. What was the final count? Was it 70-40 in the second half?
Yes.
I think that was the final,
yes.
the total in the second half. And more than all of that conspires to put the Wolves in the position they were in, not at all competitive in the second half. And the head coach addressed this. They played a masterful defensive game in the first half. Masterful. And if you keep playing that way, you still might not win that game because somebody's got to hit some shots sooner or later, but you're going to stay in the game. That defense disappeared second half. And I agree with the head coach who theorized that it went away largely because it was a team reaction, player reaction to the inability to score, and that they moped and they allowed it to seep into the other half of the game, which again, against Oklahoma City, you obviously cannot do. You have to challenge their offense start to finish. The Wolves did that. I thought it was a sort of unappealing, aesthetically pretty displeasing first half game. But that's probably how you're going to have to win.
Yeah.
That's certainly how you're going to have to play. But you have to sustain that. You can't suddenly stop pressuring from the half-court line. You can't suddenly make life too easy for them to get from point A to point B to point C. And the 70 points reflects that. Some of that is Oklahoma City got hotter. They hit some shots. But a lot of it was, I think, that we were nowhere near. They looked to me frustrated defensively in the first half. Or offensively, I should say. The head coach acknowledged. He said, look, we're down 4 at the half. We feel like we should be down 14. Now, he didn't use that exact wording, but he basically said we were down at the half, but we weren't like out of the game. And he thought that was largely because their defense was good enough to occasionally frustrate the Wolves' offense. But it felt like, from his standpoint, they kind of controlled us with what their defense was doing. And we'll never know if it could have been any different because, again, you have to hit more shots. There's no question. And you're going to have to figure out something else pretty significant. Would you not agree? I understand the defense they used basically seemed to create a wall around the free throw line where if Randall or Edwards had the ball at the top of the circle, a little bit further out from there, there were times when it appeared that they had to navigate and beat 3 defenders. There were literally, not 2, right, 3 defenders in or around that particular area, okay? So we're going to have to figure out how to handle that because to refuse or to be unable to figure out how to get to the rim or perish the thought, put up a mid-range shot, to the degree that the Wolves did in Game 1, that also is an untenable approach to winning any games in this series, let alone winning the series.
Fan and BigDeck.com want to give you a shot to win bonus bucks with our national cash contest. You can enter the keyword grand at KFAN.com. First keyword of the day. Go to KFAN.com and enter the keyword grand.
Did you know that many products for pregnant women do not have their own clinical trials for safety or efficacy? That's because pregnant women are often excluded from clinical studies. Ritual is aiming to set a new standard with their Essential Prenatal Multivitamin. It's the #1 best-selling prenatal and the only leading prenatal backed by its own human clinical trial. Essential Prenatal is proven to deliver key nutrients, including folate, biotin, and vitamin D during pregnancy. Moms taking Essential Prenatal had a lower overall cortisol level during pregnancy than those taking a leading prenatal. Plus, it's designed to be gentle on the stomach. Ritual doesn't just have your back. They have the receipts. Get 25% off at ritual.com/clinical. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Fan. Yeah, I mean, it was hard to process because he's right. It was different. It was different every time. I mean, heavy in the gaps. Sometimes trap the ball screen, sometimes don't. Sometimes just run and jump. It's kind of similar to like AAU. They remind me of like an AAU defensive team. Just run and jump, fly around. So it was pretty good. Good to get it out of our system in Game 1. So we'll be ready for Game 2. We should be ready.
Anthony Edwards, after last night's Game 1 loss, 19, 21, 21 and 21. Those are the number of turnovers the Wolves have committed the last 4 games. Now, they won 3 of the 4 because it didn't matter against Golden State. Very clearly, it's not a subject that was not explored before the series began. They didn't heed the lesson either. Now, I'll say again, Oklahoma City, I think to a certain extent you have to concede they're going to get some because that's what they do. But again, the number way too high when you add it to the inability to hit the open 3-pointers and the unwillingness to get to the basket, unwillingness or the lack of ability to get to the basket at the sort of percentage that we are accustomed to. Because I'm sure some of you have seen the analytics on that, and it's pretty dramatic. As a team that has historically, during the playoffs, especially gotten to the basket, one of the highest percentages of time. So, it's interesting because people, and we will obviously get to the. I purposefully didn't lead with SGA because I don't want to deliver the wrong message. Because I felt like if I led with it or made a bigger deal of it, I would be feeding the mob, which is, I think, way too consumed with that aspect of the loss. Because if I'm ranking them, I just don't have that high, even though, admittedly, if you have one of your best players getting into foul trouble trying to foul him and he's fouled any time, it matters. I think it's an aesthetic issue for the entire league, quite frankly, what is continuing to take place with him, as was discussed via the Twitterverse, Xverse yesterday. But I'm not. That's not whatever we think of some of those calls, and some of them were awful. I still am not going to put it towards the top of the list when your offense goes as inept as it did, and again. You're guarding. There's 4 other players on the court. I didn't think the Wolves were guarding any of them particularly well in the second half of the game. So I'm just not going to put it at the top of the list, even though there's much to be said about it. What's interesting via the text line is yesterday we both made predictions. We quoted Sam Mitchell, who's likely to join us tomorrow, who picked the Wolves in 6. I picked the Wolves. You did as well. I think Mitch Lawrence did.
Yeah.
A lot of people who are associated with this show did. And people are going, well, man, wow, I didn't expect. I didn't expect you to run them down this way the day after you picked them. I'm confused. I thought, and I'm going to count on my belief that the vast majority of our listeners are a little tougher than that. And they understand that this isn't a contradiction. The series isn't over. Now, some people might think it is. And ultimately, it might be. I'm not ready to proclaim that yet. I don't think you are either. But
Nope.
but the fact is, whether you predict what you predict and give the reasons for what you think the Wolves' advantages are, your job, I think, in this chair is to then follow the story and analyze what took place in Game 1. What went wrong? What has to get better? What is concerning? So I don't think those are mutually exclusive. The idea, you're sure running them down. What the hell are we supposed to do regarding Game 1 performance? Second half, they were outscored by 30. So that doesn't mean I'm calling for the head of the coach, benchings, saying they have no chance. But I think most of our listeners are tough enough what they want to know is what happened here? What did go wrong? What has to get better? That's the big boy kind of conversations that I would assume most people want to have. Now, some of this is from, and it's a sad, I hate to call it this, but it is the loser's lament. Because we got the hockey community just reveling.
They're ready. Skates are sharpened.
Schadenfreude. And I'll say to several of them, God bless you. Enjoy the hell out of this, but do you realize what you're confirming? You're confirming that you have so little and you are so desperate for something that all you have left is to mock and to, a better word, is revel in the pro basketball team's misery after Game 1.
Of the conference finals.
Of the conference finals. It's like, I don't know I don't know what to tell you, but you got to understand that you can do it if it makes you feel better. But all it is reminding the rest of us of is you got nothing. You may have some hopes and dreams that may materialize into something this upcoming season. I don't think anybody's ruled that out at all. Maybe this is going to be the year that things change in a way where, some stuff comes together. But, so knock yourselves out if that's what you want to do. But the fact is, you haven't been playing for 2 weeks already, and you're not even in National Hockey League circles. Nobody's thinking about you. Nobody is frightened with you, of what you are now and what you have been. You're irrelevant. I hate to put it that way in those stronger terms, but that's the fact of the matter. You're not even relevant. So anyway, so what struck you in particular last night?
Well, I'll give you I guess 4 in reverse order.
Okay.
My level of annoyance. Number 4 is the SGA stuff, which I know we're going to spend time on, because it is frustrating when McDaniels plays 24 minutes and feels like he fouled him maybe twice.
Right.
That's frustrating. Yes. 3 is obviously the defense in the second half was non-existent. And it was, Randall, I thought, reverted a little bit to the old days of, I have no idea where my guy is, and he's behind me about to dunk it, right? Like, just the lack of awareness, the lack of connectivity defensively was bad. Number 2 would be the turnovers, which the number got inflated as the game went more and more pear-shaped, but they also turned it over, I think, 6 times in the first 7 minutes when they actually did come out with, I thought, a good demeanor, and they're up 8-0. Not like the game's over, but they're there. They're ready to play. Let's see what happens. What bugged me about the turnovers, and I tweeted about it at halftime, it was almost like they were surprised that if they held the ball for more than 4 seconds, one of the pit bulls wouldn't be on him to help out his teammate.
Held the ball, especially turning your back to your main defender, knowing that that's what they do. They wait for you to turn your back, and then they come to the side, right? That's the whole point.
Ant did it. Julius did it at the end of the infamous first half, where
when they had a chance to be up 9.
They should be up 9 or 10, no problem. But it's just the lack of attentiveness and the lack of attention to detail that you just can't have no matter what's happening around you. You have to, and that goes back to Naz, too. And Doris Burke, and I thought one of her finer moments last night, even said it. You can't just flip the ball to a guy that's not looking near half court against Oklahoma City. They lived to tell about it that particular time. But that, to me, was just the epitome of the casualness that too many people had with the ball. Ant included, driving into 3 people, losing the ball the whole bit. And then the first one, number 1, the biggest culprit offensively was the shooting was just so bad. And it feels like you're going to get open looks. And you are going to get open looks. And I know that's the stat we've all clinged to the last month of their, 1 for 64 on wide open 3-pointers. And we all know exactly what that means. Jace Frederick tweeted it out, and it's a damning stat, or a worrisome stat, I think, long term. Oklahoma City doesn't mind you shooting wide open threes because of how frantic it was to get you that ball. And Finchie even talked about it a little bit. Passes are at your knees instead of right at the in the shooting pocket. Or Conley has to move over 2 steps because Ant doesn't get it to him right in the corner. Against OKC this year, wide open threes, opponents shoot 33%. That's 7th worst in the NBA. On wide open threes, they shoot the worst in the NBA because of how much it takes for you to get that look. And so it might feel like, wow, we're getting good looks, but you're kind of getting the looks they want you to get, and that's what worries me.
Yeah, and I this is a subject for another day. Part of what's starting to scare me is we're prisoner. What does wide open even mean? Because there are people who debate whether wide open means what I think the average person thinks it does, and how that is even interpreted.
There's open and then there's wide open.
Exactly. And even there's some people who say, in fact, Horton brought this up with us, that one of the companies that does this, there's a lot of question whether how accurate, what does that really mean? And we just repeat these stats.
We like to see them,
because they are alarming when you look at them to try to explain stuff, but I'm not even sure necessarily they tell the entire story. Well, we'll find out what a guy who covers the Wolves daily, how he digested all of Game 1, and more importantly, what he expects the Wolves. It's the old adjustment deal. You lose, you're supposed to make some adjustments. What he expects from the Wolves in Game 2. Chris Hine covers the Wolves for the Star Tribune. He is going to join us in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned.
There are a lot of good shots out there. I think, we got to clean things up a little bit. Sometimes the passes were late. Sometimes we weren't quite shot ready. Sometimes we need to turn them into other plays, But I did think that we got a number of really good looks, and we really couldn't connect when the game was kind of turning against us, so.
By the way, a couple of breaking sports items that might be of note to the listenership, unrelated to the Western Conference Finals. The tush push is here to stay, at least for another year. I think there was a majority of votes in favor of eliminating it, but they didn't get the percentage they needed. I think they were 2 votes short.
They needed 24 and got 22.
Meanwhile, your red-hot Minnesota Twins, in a game that took like 4 days to finish, end up with a walk-off victory against Cleveland. I think it was 6-5 was the final.
Clemens kid again. He
did it again. His OPS is over 1,000. That was the 10th consecutive home victory for your Minnesota Twins, who are now preparing to go for a sweep in a game that may have already started. I know it was going to start
0-0 in the bottom of the third.
So there you have it. There's some stuff not related to your favorite basketball team. And that team is being followed by our next guest, Chris Hine, who covers the club for the Star Tribune. He joins us via the Connecticut Water Systems hotline. Okay, so we are well aware it's best of 7. It's not best of 1. This isn't the big dance. So no one should be declaring the series over. And the Wolves' last series were down, obviously 1-0. What do we think, or do you think, that Wolves fans need to be aware of regarding what it is going to take to respond in the way that the Wolves need to against a team that I think we'll all agree is playing at a higher level than either the Lakers or the Golden State Warriors?
I think you look back to game 1 of that Warriors series, and you have a team that plays aggressive, pesky, physical defense. And after the Wolves struggled to hit shots in that game, they figured some things out. They settled down. And even though Steph Curry wasn't part of that series, I think they figured some things out against that Warriors defense. Ant played off ball a little more. They were a little more in rhythm. Mike Conley was kind of saying some of the same things he was saying after game 1 of that series, that passes were just a click too late. Maybe guys were rushing shots. So I think it played out kind of similarly in tone on that end of the floor to game 1 of the Warriors series. And they were able to readjust well enough in that series and figure some things out as it went along to eventually win the next 4 games. So if you're looking for a ray of optimism here, I think that's it. If that maybe it just takes a game for them to recalibrate a little bit. But the flip side of that is I don't think that they have encountered, or nobody has encountered, a defense quite like the Thunder's defense. It's a step up from even what the Warriors were giving them, and especially when it comes to converting those turnovers into huge runs that just take over a game. The Warriors weren't capable of that. The Thunder certainly are.
For sure. So, it's interesting because at halftime you could look at it 2 different ways. From the Wolves standpoint, you could say, we don't like how he finished the series, the second quarter offensively. We were up 9. We felt like when you leave the court only up 4, that you left some food on the table. Yet, okay, you're kind of taking the crowd out of it a little bit. You've been really good and pesky defensively, and it's an ugly game, and maybe that's the way you have to win. On the other hand, I guess Okie City could say, look, our best player is shooting terribly. We're not doing much of anything particularly well, and we're only down 4. So for you at halftime, how did you feel about the Wolves' condition at that point?
I felt more that it was in Oklahoma City's wheelhouse than the Wolves' wheelhouse, just based off of how the Wolves supporting cast had come out shooting the night. Dante, Nikhil, and Nas just were ice cold, and I think it was just really hard to flip that sometimes mid-game. And when you have an MVP on the other end of the court in Shea, he could flip it mid-game. I think it's a little harder for the supporting cast to do that, especially when they're so dependent on ball movement and creation. And then I think you saw in the second half, everything was kind of rushed. It felt like guys were forcing some shots up just to try to get going, try to get the offense going, try to break the big run Oklahoma City went on in the third quarter. So I had the feeling that it was more in the Thunder's. That was the kind of half that they needed. It was better for them that it was a 4-point deficit. If you're the Wolves, you're sitting there thinking, man, if Dante or Nikhil or Nas, like, if they just hit a couple shots instead of a 9-point lead at that point in the second quarter, it could have been like 15 or 17 or something like that. That's where they were at that point in time. And sure enough, that was all Oklahoma City needed to hang around and then make their big run in the second half.
Part of what I think Finchie talked about after the game struck me the same way, that clearly the Wolves were not as good defensively in the third quarter. And I thought I remember him saying he felt that their offensive issues, the inability to hit shots and get anything going offensively, seeped into what had been, I think, a pretty impressive for a half defensive performance. Did you see it that way?
I did, and that's often the case with this team, is that the offense affects the defense more than the other way around. I think on offense, if they're not hitting shots, they can't quite set up in the half court maybe as much as they want. They, maybe are a step slow. Their spirit is drained a little bit. They start letting the officials affect them or get into their heads, or, they lose a little bit of composure with the officiating. So I tend to think that that's a characteristic of this team, is bad offense can lead to subpar defense, and it happened at the worst possible moment. But one thing that I think I've been impressed with the Wolves during this playoff run is they have not let a lot of problems linger. That when stuff like this has happened, whether it was Game 2 against the Lakers series, which I thought was kind of similar to last night, where everything just kind of fell out of sorts in a hurry, they were able to readjust by the next game and have better composure with the officiating, not let the offense affect the defense as much. And that's the key to being a deep playoff team, is when these issues of yours, these fatal flaws pop up, how quickly can you suppress them and tamp them back down again and become the best version of yourself? So far, the Wolves have done that great through 11 playoff games, but I just think this is a different kind of level that Oklahoma City's on compared to their first two rounds.
Is there a basketball adjustment that can or should be made related to getting, to the basket more often, and as often as the Wolves usually do, as a team that has done that very well, actually, and didn't do it much at all, if at all, last night, against a defense that does sort of look like they've kind of put up a wall near the free throw line, and it seems like there are two or three guys kind of waiting for any kind of attempt to slash to the basket. Is there a way out of that mix? Is there a way out of to get Oklahoma State? Oh, I keep calling them Oklahoma State, OKC out of that thing to get something else done where it's not either a 3-point shot, or it's, only an occasional attempt to get to the basket?
This is why I don't make millions of dollars to be an NBA coach, because if I had a clear-cut answer for you, I might be on a coaching staff somewhere. But my very amateur opinion would be, we heard Anthony Edwards say that he's to play a little more off-ball in his post-game presser last night. Does that mean it's more Mike Conley trying to probe the defense, get them to switch around a little bit or collapse in, and then you do the swing kind of thing out to Ant off the ball, and then Ant tries to find a lane as he's getting that second or third pass in a sequence? Is that part of the answer? Maybe, instead of having Ant initiate that action. Same thing with Julius, or maybe Julius is the initiator, draws the crowd, tries to play out of it a little better than he did last night in that second half, and Ant becomes the beneficiary of that. But the issue with that was, as we saw, if Julius is taking his time trying to attract the crowd, they're liable to strip the ball from him, and all of a sudden they're going down the other way for an easy bucket. So that comes with its own set of issues. I think one of the underrated things about last night was Jaden had it going early offensively. I think he hit the first two shots of the night, and then the foul trouble that cost him his minutes, I think, hurt the offense as a whole, because it seemed like he was maybe on track to having one of those kind of games that he's had this postseason where he scores in the mid-20s or something like that. And he could have been that other weapon that they needed that nobody on the bench was able to be last night. but the foul trouble in the second half just had him sitting so much. And, I thought that was actually they missed his offense just as much as they missed his defense last night.
Chris Hine covers the Timberwolves for the Star Tribune, joining us on the Fan. Lou Nanny will be in studio at about 4:15. I think there's several media reports and maybe even an official announcement from the league that indeed Shai Gilgeous-Alexander will be named the most valuable player for 2024-25. No big surprise there, but that leads us into the obvious discussion regarding the challenges with him in terms of the foul calls that took place last night. And what's interesting is the debate. I think even people who have no rooting interest for the team trying to beat Oklahoma City in this round or in any round, there are people saying the league's got a problem, that this guy is literally being officiated differently than every other player in the league. A, do you agree with that allegation, that premise? And B, what's the miracle salve that the Wolves can apply here, or that Finchie can apply, to not get the players constantly consumed with this, but to attempt to do something about perhaps changing the officiating calculus in this series?
It's really hard to look at some of those clips from last night, whether it was the Nikhil foul that the Wolves ended up challenging and winning, or the play that Jaden committed his sixth foul on. You see the whether it was just no contact or just very minimal contact, and Shai falls to the ground and a whistle blows immediately. It's really hard to look at those clips and say that he's not officiated a little differently. Finch today during his practice scrum kind of got in a little jab that he thinks Ant is being fouled when Ant gets into the lane. He didn't mention Shai's name during it, but he felt that maybe Ant is not the beneficiary of the same kind of whistle in that sense. It's tough, and they've said all the right things coming out of game one. They're not letting the officiating, at least from their end of things, become a public storyline. It is, but privately, and you just see how, loud they are about their complaints on the sideline, or you see the body language after one of those calls happens on the floor. So at least publicly, they're trying to keep the composure, put on the right face and say the right things. But that if it happens again, I wonder if we're going to have a different tone post game tomorrow night. So the Ant gets a technical, kind of soft tossing the ball right in the breadbasket of SGA, who was, I think, on the ground under the basket at that point. Is that how we should interpret that decision? That, man, I'm tired of you acting and getting all these calls. What do we make of that little incident? Perhaps. I think so. We didn't ask Ian about that. Mm-hmm. Probably journalistic malpractice on our part last night. But I think Ant is looking to set a tone. We saw it in that Lakers series when he was pushing LeBron up and down the floor. So I think some of this is intentional on Ant's part to set that kind of tone. There was another moment, I think, in the second quarter when they got tangled up and Ant was really physical with him. He got away with a couple pushes against him, and I was surprised there wasn't a whistle. And finally, Ant took it a little too far. And then finally, the official had no choice but to call a foul on Ant in that situation. So I think Ant is trying to set a tone, trying to send a message to Shai or the officials or whoever, the league, fans as a whole, that, look, it's going to be physical out here. And, I don't know if it's a matter of respect or whatever, respecting the game, his game, Shai's game, whatever it is. I do feel like that is sending a bit of a message as to how this series is going to go, or how Ant wants it to go. So on the morning or today when Finchie met the Jackals, you among them, was there much exploration about, all right, yeah, we had a lot of really good looks from three. They're allegedly open. I get scared of how a lot of those are interpreted by the analytics people, because I'm not sure we can necessarily trust all the time when they call something open or wide open that it really is. But do you get the sense that Finchie's going, look, if we're going to win this series, we're going to have to hit a much higher percentage of that. And if we don't, God bless Oklahoma City, they can move forward. Or that there's a little bit of concern that,
the Wolves went too far with the joke yesterday in terms of the number of threes they took?
I think the interesting thing Finch said today was, they missed obviously a number of open looks, but they didn't get to a number of open looks as well, especially in that second half. That there were looks and plays there to be made that they didn't make, and I think that's maybe one of the takeaways I have from Finch's session today was they weren't making the right plays. I think in the first half they were generally making the right plays; they were just missing. The second half, that wasn't as consistent. So it sounded like that was a lot of what they focused on in the second half was making the right reads and the right plays against that defense, where apparently they saw stuff that was open that, they just didn't hit or didn't convert. I'm with you when it comes to that analytics stuff. I don't think guys take threes in the NBA unless they're open to wide open.
Right.
Like the shot just doesn't go up. To me, the issue is it like an in rhythm three?
Yeah.
Is it does it come as a result of ball movement? Is it a step back? If a guy's good at taking a step back like Ant is, does it come in a good rhythm?
Mm-hmm.
Like most of these shots are open shots, or else guys do not take, really tightly contested threes unless it's at the end of a shot clock typically. So I'm with you. Like I don't really put too much stock in the wide open debate. I'm more about, was it a rhythm look or was it not a rhythm look? So
it's well established, and you wrote about it, that the we call it on this show affectionately the Ant Colony, the complimentary players, particularly those off the bench, simply shot poorly, did not contribute. Naz Reid was awful in terms of his shooting. I also thought way too casual with the ball again, which we see from him from time to time against a team that's just, they'll eat you up if you do that. So from your perspective, is it a single player off the bench that you think is key to this thing, or is it, no, it's just got to be one or two of them? It doesn't really matter which ones, but you're going to have one or two. Based on matchups, based on what you know about these two teams, is Naz the guy it has to be, or not necessarily?
I tend to think it is Naz just because of his combination of size and skill. If you're able to downshift, with Julius, Naz, that front court when Rudy's off the floor, with Ant out there and OKC having to respect Naz both inside and outside and, what he may give you on the other end in terms of ability to guard the perimeter, I think he is probably a little more of the key on both ends of the floor than Dante or Nikhil. Nikhil obviously is going to be big in this series because of his ability to guard Shea, and that's going to be important for them. Dante just knocking down open looks. But I just think because of Naz's size, what that may do to the matchup game from Oklahoma City's perspective, if Naz gets it going, that might force Oklahoma City's hand in terms of matchups and who they're deploying out there, as opposed to, say, a good Dante game, I think.
What did they do defensively, or what did the Wolves do to themselves offensively that made Randall so less pertinent to the offense or effective in the offense in the second half?
I think I read a stat that Julius had 10 potential assists or something like that last night, and so I feel like some of that just might have been just bricking shots. But I will say it's very tough, whether it's Julius, whether it's Ant, and you saw this a number of times last night. It's just really hard to break down that first line of defense that Oklahoma City has. Like, I feel like that's how the Wolves end up generating a lot of their ball movement. You have guys committing, over two on the ball, and then the Wolves make the right read out of that, and all of a sudden their ball movement is going. That was really tough to generate last night for, I thought, Ant and Julius. They're able to stand Julius up, and if they were sending two over to Julius, we saw a few times they were going for a steal, they were going for a deflection, and they were successful at times in getting that. They had a good scouting report, I think, on when to deploy the double against Julius, at what moments to come and try to strip him of the ball, like you saw late in the second quarter there. So I think it's that. I think it's that first line of defense holds up. You don't need to collapse in the paint as much on him in that sense, or at least you can wait to deliver the help. And by that time, perhaps you're getting a rush shot out of it.
I assume this discussion has been had, but it was rather exasperating for them to have all the scouting report information, I'm sure they did, about the Oklahoma City defense, having played against it but yet still be stubborn about, all right, I'm gonna put my back to the main defender on me, and I'm going to dribble, and to see, of course, the help defender then come from the blind side and steal the ball away. How is it possible that the Wolves could fall into that trap, knowing everything that clearly they had to know about Oklahoma City's defense?
Well, I think sometimes with the Wolves, I think we have, a little bit of hot stove syndrome. You it's you tell the kid that the stove is hot, but they have to burn their hand first to, figure it out. I think that is the Timberwolves sometimes, that they need to learn it for themselves at least one time before they can make the adjustments and see, oh yeah, they actually will do that to us if we aren't careful with the ball. So that's why I'm interested to see, do they clean some of this stuff up in game 2? Because in the Warriors series, they did a good job of that. Even though they had a high number of turnovers the rest of that series, they still were able to generate, I thought, pretty good ball movement as the series went on. We'll see if it's similar here. But I just think sometimes with these guys, I think it just takes a little. They got to see it for themselves on the floor instead of on film before they really make adjustments.
Finally, what's your big story that will soon be, if it's not already, available via StarTribune.com?
Yeah, I got a hold of Nikhil Alexander Walker's mother, Nicole, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's dad, Vaughn, to talk about kind of what the relationship was between the two of them growing up in Canada and how close they were, and just what's like in the family right now as Shai and Nikhil battle each other in the Western Conference Finals. I think, hopefully people will enjoy that. And told my editors that it was going to be a little on the long side, and one staffer who shall remain nameless told me, well, you could go by the Dan Barreiro rule. The earlier the story is in, the longer it could be. So I won't rat that person out, but that's what they told me at about noon today.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that I'm actually shocked.
It's quite a legacy.
They still remember me at all. It's only been 20 bleeping years. That's actually, I'll take that. Even if it's cheap shot, I'll accept it that they haven't completely forgotten. That's
I think it was said with love. It was said with love.
That's okay. No problem. Well, most importantly, enjoy your night off in Oklahoma City. And we'll talk to you soon and be as you prepare for game 2 tomorrow. Thanks, man.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
I appreciate it, Chris. That's Chris Hine, who covers the Timberwolves for, well, clearly my former newspaper, the Star Tribune. Good to know there's still some cheap shot copy editors out there who remember me and remember my legacy for. It'll shock people who listen to some of my questions. I did like to write longer stories. A lot harder to write them back in those days because they had to appear in print. Now Johnny Athletic can write like 200 inches on whatever he wants. You just keep going.
He doesn't even tell his editor what's coming.
No, there's no limit because it doesn't have to fit into a hard piece of news, a newsprint. You know what I'm saying? Back in the day, that's what you had to do. But believe me, there were a lot of really, really
I believe it.
Tense, challenging negotiations. You can't cut that. Well, if you're going to cut it, we got to cut this paragraph. But you shouldn't cut it at all. That's how it went most of the time.
How much of your greatness do you think we were deprived of?
On the cutting room floor?
Yes, for all you guys.
Well, to be honest, it reached a point in my newspaper career where I was so distraught if I actually read the paper the next morning, then to find out what was missing, that I stopped reading.
Probably makes sense.
I literally stopped looking because it was better if I didn't know. But then the times I did, and they lopped off an ending.
Good luck.
I didn't handle it all that well. In any case, top of the hour pause. Louie in about 15 minutes. In addition, we've got Kessler in studio and Louie in studio as well. Reaction to what Chris had to say. Hit the Bradshaw and Brian KFAN text line at 64686.